Stephen Garvey, founder, leader of National Citizens Alliance. Today I'm going to do a short introduction to the Bank of Canada and the corruption and fraud going on. It's been going on for decades and decades, irrespective of which establishment party is in power. So, uh, in the National Citizens Alliance view, the Bank of Canada fraud, scam, whatever you want to call it, in our opinion, is at the pinnacle of the corruption in Canada, and it's very grave and serious. Uh, in the in the coming weeks, I will have on some of our financial experts to dwell deeper into the Bank of Canada and the corruption going on. But today, I'm going to outline some of the main points you may need to know, and some of our member supporters are highly informed on this subject. So if I'm saying things you already know, just realize we're trying to reach the average Canadian, the greater mass, to wake them up because something has to change. Something has to change, everyone. This cannot continue. And so, as I said, I'm going to highlight some of the key dates and events that have taken place, and I will show you some concrete evidence of why you and your family should be very concerned. But the silver lining here, the silver lining is that there is hope to deal with this corruption. And I will get to that, but this is pertaining to the Rocco Comer case against the Bank of Canada, and I will refer to that in this presentation today. The first thing we need to know is that back in 1929, Canada ceased to have gold as a backing of its currency. That's going way back, 1929. That's when that first started. No longer is gold backing the Canadian dollar. Um, uh, the Canadian dollar is backed simply by the confidence of the Canadian people. And if you look into it further, it's actually backed by other fiat currencies, and many of which do not have any backing except the confidence of their own people. And right now, the Canadian currency is backed by the American currency, um, which isn't backed by gold or silver. It's just backed by the confidence of the American people. So that's very troubling. There's no stability to the currency. And that's one key point everyone needs to keep in mind. 1934, there's the Bank of Canada Act. And this established the Bank of Canada in terms of a banking institution of, for, and by the Canadian people. That act premises that the Bank of Canada belongs to the Canadian people. And what it did through that act is allow currency to be printed at 0% interest for the needs of the Canadian people, such as infrastructure, other developments of our country, other demands, hospitals, roads, etc. And we have deviated from that, and I'm gonna get back to that later on in this discussion. Another key, and this is what I just mentioned. In 1971, everyone remember that date. The American currency was decoupled from the gold standard, and that means it no longer, after 1971, it no longer had the backing of the gold standard. Um, the only backing was the confidence of the American people. The problem with that for us Canadians is that our Canadian currency is backed by the American currency, which is no longer backed by gold. And incidentally, Canada has sold all its gold without any consent of the Canadian people. Another very significant event was 1974. And this is when Pierre Elliott Trudeau and the establishment, not just the Liberals, but the crony Conservatives on the other side, allowed the Bank of Canada public lending right to shift to central banks. And it was in 1974, that's when we lost, the Bank of Canada no longer became of, by, and for the Canadian people. In 1974, the Bank of Canada became in service of these central banksters. And that was very significant. And there's a good article here. I'm going to bring it up here. It's right here. This article here is very good if you have time to go on there. It's on the Bank of Canada should be reinstated to its original mandate purposes. And that's obviously the 1934 Bank of Canada Act. And this article goes into it. It's interesting. It says here, quote, in 1974, the Bank of International Settlements, and this is the Bank of Central Bankers, formed the Basel Committee to ostensibly establish global monetary and fiscal financial stability. Canada, AE, the Pierre Trudeau Liberals joined in the deliberations. The Basel Committee solution to the stagflation problem of that time was to encourage governments to borrow from private banks that charge interest and end the practice of borrowing interest-free from their own publicly owned banks. So that's basically what happened. I'm going to show you the repercussions of this profound move. And what's really troubling is that the Canadian people were not consulted. They were not given a say. This is all top-down globalist politics going on in Ottawa at that time. And I'm going to take you to the. This is the bank right here. This is the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements. It's comprised of over 60 central banks, including Canada, and they account for 95% of the world GDP. And their head office is in Basel, Switzerland. They have 2 representative offices in Hong Kong, Mexico City, and here to look it up. So this BIS, the World Bank, the IMF, the Bilderberg, the international banking, central banking cartel has control over our currency, our money. And please understand, this has impacts on all Canadians because money permeates throughout our entire society. Very, very disturbing. So right now, our money supply is controlled by the international banking cartel. There was a case that occurred. The Rocco Comer case tried to challenge what happened. And a lot of our supporters and members know about this, but I will bring it up right here. It's right here. This is the Comer Rocco case against the Bank of Canada. They wanted, like the NCA, to return the Bank of Canada to the true Bank of Canada, where it was in service of the Canadian people. It belonged to the Canadian people. And I'm gonna quote right here. But you know the key point here is that the Supreme Court dismissed the case on grounds that they viewed this as a political decision. What Pierre Trudeau did in 1974. Vis-a-vis the Canadian electorate voted in Pierre Trudeau's government, and therefore he had the authority to do whatever he wanted. That was basically the analysis and conclusion of the Supreme Court. The silver lining here is if the NCA can get into power, we can reverse this. That's the silver lining. So there is hope at the end of the tunnel here. But we have to get into power. Then we can reinstate, clean up all this mess of these establishment parties. I'm going to look at the Comer case here. And there's a good point here. It says the proposed Canada Infrastructure Bank makes crystal clear the urgent need to now concentrate our efforts within the political arena. So we encourage people to come and help National Citizens Alliance. And we have a growing financial people supporting the party who care about our country first. And then it goes on to say, in its arguments, the Crown has contended that the government's decision to drastically reduce its borrowing from the Bank of Canada was made by the people of Canada through the political process, although the changes made were never debated publicly nor in Parliament. So this is just top-down globalist politics. Quote, this failure of the political process has led to the exponential growth of Canada's debt incurred by all three levels of government due to the accumulated deficits, compound interest charges, as well as to the significant fiscal restraints on funding government programs and infrastructures. And that was from the law offices of Rocco Galati. So there is hope there. We can do this in the political arena, but we need to get enough people behind the NCA so we can get back to the true Bank of Canada. There's political forces in Canada that are greatly benefiting from the international banking cartel control over the Canadian money supply. So we're going to face stiff opposition, but if we get enough Canadians behind us, we can do this. And I talked to one of our financial experts today, Bruce, who I will have on next week, but he said there's real hope in Canada to take a lead role in this, because this is happening worldwide. Because we have the 1934 Bank of Canada Act. We already have the legislation. We just need to reinstitute the 1934 Bank of Canada Act, and we can lead the way. We already have the legislation. So that's very positive. And I'm going to show the impact of this now. This is a look at Canada's debt from 1867 to 2017, and it's in billions of dollars. And you can see Canada from 1867 all the way up to 1974 was fiscally responsible. There was minimal federal debt. You see that right there. It's clear as day. As soon as the public lending rate shifted, as soon as the Bank of Canada became in service of central banksters, look what happened to the debt. Skyrocketed, irrespective of which crony establishment party was in power. And right here, this was a major boom period in Canada, and the argument is that not enough debt was paid off. And that was largely under Martin. And then look at the debt under Harper, and then you got Trudeau just adding more and more. It doesn't matter if you're conservative, liberal. They're two sides of the same coin, everyone. Look at them. Under Mulroney, it just skyrocketed the debt. No different than Pierre Trudeau. But who is benefiting here? We need to ask. All this debt is owed to these central banks, to these commercial banks. And we're paying interest every day on the money owed. And right now, federally, it's over $1 trillion in market debt. Nationally, we're paying over $64 billion in debt service payments. This is very disturbing. Very disturbing. I'm going to show another graph here, which shows this is even worse. This is on the money supply. So this is a printing of our currency. And it was, since 1867, it was, again, stable, very, very modest. And then you see in 1974, there's been a steady growth in the Canadian money supply. And this is printing of the fiat currency. Look at that. ever since 1974. And these are the central banksters printing our currency. And by printing the currency, that is inflation. That means the Canadian dollar has less value. And if you do the math on this, since 1974, there's been an 800% increase in the Canadian money supply. And I talked to one of our financial experts today, and he said this just shows the system is out of control. They just keep printing more and more money. It's not being used productively in Canadian society, and they're just trying to patch what's going on. And this is a big bubble forming, everyone. And eventually it will collapse, and this money will end up being worthless. This is where it's heading. And look at that. And I talked to our financial. He said in 2008 through TARP, TARP, there was over 750 billion printed by central banks. Trillions of dollars are printed to keep these economies going. They just keep printing more and more money, and that results in more and more inflation. And remember, the Canadian currency, the US currency, is not backed by any commodities. It's all based on the confidence of the Canadian people, the American people. This is very disturbing, what's happening. And there's one other point I want to make today. In 1999, President Clinton, he actually rescinded the Glass-Steagall Act, which created separation between banks and brokers, banks and the Wall Street. So now these brokers on Wall Street and the banks are all working together. There's no separation anymore. That's very concerning. And in Canada, there's no separation between banks and brokers. So all the speculation with our money, they're printing the fiat currency, which does not have backing behind it. We're paying all kinds of interest on the money. And where's all this money going? Where's all this money going? Look at it. This is in millions of dollars. 40,000 million. Right there. 800%. Where's all this money going? It's clearly not going to infrastructure in Canada. The system is rotten to the core. This system is rotten to the core. They're making us slaves to the global banksters. That's what's happening. These crony politicians in Ottawa who are just stringed to these central banksters, they're stringed to the Bank of Canada. This is what's happening, everyone. You are paying, you are enslaved. So we need to get our country back on track. The whole financial system in the world is in peril right now. So I'm going to do a follow-up on this, but I'll tell you our solution. The National Citizens Alliance supports returning to the true Bank of Canada. That is in service, full service of the Canadian people. That belongs to the Canadian people. The Bank of Canada that is of, by, and for the Canadian people. Not for these central banksters. Not for the IMF. Not for the Bank of International Settlements. Not for the World Bank. That's what we want to do. And the great thing is that we have the 1934 Bank of Canada Act. We just need to reinstitute that. Then we can print money at 0% currency towards our infrastructure, to things that we need. And as it creates value, then interest will be incurred. Right now, these central banksters are charging you and your families interest on every time they print the Canadian currency in secrecy. No one in Ottawa talks about it because they're on the take and they're stringed to it. And we need to have a national discussion on the Bank of Canada. We are slaves to these central banksters. We are getting fleeced every day. I have to emphasize that. The interest payments. They have control over us. Money is in every aspect of our society. They are printing a fake currency, a fiat currency that has no backing. It's adding inflation to you and your families. Every time they print the money, the Canadian dollar has less value. So I will make an announcement of our next live stream on the Bank of Canada. But this was the 10th of this today was an introduction. I hope you found it helpful, and if it resonates with you, please share it. And I want to do a call out to our veterans for Remembrance Day, and National Citizens Alliance is thinking of you, and we honor you, your sacrifices, and your service to our country.